The war had raged for centuries. Across countless planets, among the ruins of once thriving civilizations, the struggle continued. Two of the most advanced species in the known galaxy had been locked in conflict for so long that neither side remembered who struck first. Their war machines had burned entire worlds to ash. Their fleets had reduced moons to drifting debris fields, and their soldiers had perished by the trillions. And yet, neither side could claim victory. One faction prided itself on superior strategy and coordination, their minds functioning like living supercomputers. Every move they made was calculated to the finest detail, every battle waged with ruthless efficiency. The other faction was built for war, biologically engineered for destruction, their bodies hardened against weapons, their instincts honed over millennia of bloodshed. One side thought its way through war, the other tore through it with brute force. And so the war dragged on. For every planet won, another was lost. For every fleet destroyed, another took its place. Hope had long faded, replaced only by the endless churn of destruction. Then humanity arrived. It had been mere months since their first encounter with the greater galactic community. The larger empires barely acknowledged them, just another young, insignificant species clinging to their homeworld, boasting of their technological advancements while still struggling with their own primitive conflicts. And yet, when the humans learned of the war that had raged for centuries, they did something no one expected. They volunteered to end it. No one took their offer seriously. The war had outlived entire civilizations, shattered empires, and rewritten the balance of the galaxy. What could this upstart species possibly do that billions of others had not? The answer came 5 hours after the humans entered the war. It started with the arrival of a single fleet, smaller than the armadas both warring factions routinely deployed. No great spectacle, no announcement, just an entry into the contested sector where the latest battle was raging. The commanders of the warring factions barely took notice. They were too focused on their own struggle, too deep in their centuries-old hatred. Then, their ships started disappearing. At first, it seemed like a sensor malfunction. A battlecruiser, one of the largest in the sector, simply ceased to exist on the scanners. A moment later, another ship was gone. No explosion, no energy signature, just erased from reality. Panic rippled through the battlefield. The warring factions had fought for so long that they had seen nearly every tactic imaginable. But this was something else. Even their most advanced technology could not explain what was happening. Then the humans sent a message. "Lay down your weapons. The war ends now." The message was ignored. The factions would not surrender to an enemy they could not even see. So the humans continued. Entire fleets vanished in an instant. Military outposts crumbled without a single shot fired. Weapons systems turned against their own ships. Defensive barriers collapsed as if they had never existed. The war that had lasted for centuries, one that had survived every strategy, every escalation, and every desperate attempt at resolution, was being dismantled in real time. Desperation took hold. One faction launched every superweapon in their arsenal, filling the void of space with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. The humans didn't even dodge. The weapons simply failed. The energy dispersed harmlessly. Missiles vanished mid-flight. Reality itself seemed to reject the idea that these weapons could harm the newcomers. It was then that both factions understood. They were not fighting a war anymore. They were being corrected. Another message came through. "Last chance. Surrender, or we finish this the hard way." Within the hour, the war ended. A conflict that had outlasted civilizations, that had cost more lives than could be counted, that had become the defining struggle of an entire region of the galaxy. Over. Just like that. The galactic community reeled. Some watched in terror, others in awe. But one thing was clear. Humanity was not just another species. They were something else entirely. And now the galaxy had to ask itself a question. What happens when an unstoppable war machine finally has peace? Because if humans could end a war in 5 hours, what else were they capable of? The silence that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. For the first time in centuries, there were no battle reports flooding the communication networks, no distress calls from the front lines, no desperate strategists scrambling to turn the tide. The war was over. The factions that had been at each other's throats for generations now sat in stunned disbelief. And at the center of it all stood humanity. The leaders of both factions, once sworn enemies, now found themselves in the same position, on the receiving end of something they had never known before: absolute defeat. Aboard a human command vessel, representatives from both sides were seated at a long table, their eyes locked onto the single human standing before them. She was no warrior, no battle-hardened general. She wore no armor, carried no weapons. And yet, she radiated something far more terrifying than any battlefield commander they had ever faced: confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm, almost casual, "shall we discuss the terms?" One of the representatives, still too shaken to compose himself, slammed a clawed hand onto the table. "This is impossible. You did something. We demand to know what." She smiled. "Of course. You see, for centuries you've been fighting the same war, using the same strategies, the same weapons, the same thinking. You adjusted, adapted, but you never truly evolved. You were trapped in an endless loop, a self-sustaining conflict where neither side could win. And then," she gestured at herself, "we showed up." Another representative, from the other faction, narrowed his many eyes. "You tampered with our systems. You used some kind of forbidden technology. Our fleets vanished without a trace." "Ah," the woman said, as if mildly amused. "You're assuming we use technology beyond your understanding. That's adorable." The room fell into an uneasy silence. One of the faction leaders, a towering figure clad in ceremonial armor, leaned forward. "Then what did you do?" She exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to tell them the truth. "Simple," she said. "We outthought you." The war-hardened leaders exchanged glances. "You have your strategies, your carefully planned maneuvers, your centuries of tactics refined and perfected, but you never accounted for us." She stepped forward, placing her hands on the table. "You've seen what we did in 5 hours. Do you really want to know what we could do in 5 days?" There was no response. "Now," she continued, leaning back, "here's how this is going to go. You're going to sign a peace treaty. No more war, no more skirmishes, no more accidents. You will never raise a weapon against each other again." She paused, her expression hardening. "Or against us." The room felt colder. "And if we refuse?" one of the leaders asked, though his voice lacked the defiance it should have had. The woman gave a slow, almost pitying smile. "Then you'll simply cease to exist." She didn't say it as a threat. She didn't have to. It was a statement of fact. The war had raged for centuries. Humanity had ended it in 5 hours. No one doubted for a second that they could erase both factions just as easily. The decision was made before the meeting had even ended. The war that had shaped the course of history, the conflict that had defined an entire region of the galaxy, was over. And humanity? They walked away as if it had all been business as usual. The galaxy had changed that day. The balance of power had shifted. Because now everyone had to ask themselves the same question. What happens when the humans decide they don't like something? In the days that followed, the galaxy stood on edge. The war that had raged for centuries was gone, wiped away in a mere 5 hours by a species that most had dismissed as insignificant. And now, the surviving factions were left with the unsettling reality of what had happened. They had not been outgunned, they had not been outnumbered, they had been outmatched in every way. For the first time in their long history, they were afraid. The defeated factions had signed the peace treaty without protest, knowing full well that resistance was futile. The document had been drafted by humanity, written in clear, simple terms that left no room for misinterpretation. There would be no more war, no more hostilities, no attempts to rebuild what had been lost. And above all else, no one would challenge humanity. The leaders of the galaxy's greatest powers convened in a secret meeting, far from prying human eyes. They had to understand how. How had the humans achieved this? What had they done to render two of the most warlike species completely powerless? They must have discovered some forbidden technology, one leader speculated. Something beyond our comprehension. That doesn't make sense, another argued. If they had that kind of power, why not conquer us all? A chilling thought settled over the room. They didn't need to. A species that could dismantle an entire war in 5 hours had no need for conquest. They didn't rule through force. They ruled through fear. For the first time, the galactic elite realized that humanity was something different, something dangerous. They had been allowed to exist. But the real question was, why? The answer came sooner than expected. A transmission from Earth arrived, not with threats, not with demands, but with something far stranger. An invitation. Humanity had called for a summit. Every major civilization, every faction, every species with influence was invited to Earth itself to discuss the future of the galaxy. No one refused. They couldn't. The meeting was held in a massive structure humans called the United Nations headquarters, a building that had once served as a hub for diplomacy among their own people. Now, it would serve as the first true gathering of galactic powers under human oversight. The leaders arrived, their ships hovering over a planet that, to the outside eye, looked painfully ordinary. No grand defense stations, no massive space fleets, no signs of the overwhelming power they had witnessed. And yet, none dared test humanity's patience. Inside the summit hall, the human representatives greeted each leader personally. No armed guards, no security measures, just humans, shaking hands and smiling as if they had not just rewritten the course of galactic history. When the meeting began, the same human woman who had dictated the peace terms stood at the center. "Welcome to Earth," she said simply. The alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. "We know what you're all thinking," she continued. "You're afraid. You're wondering what we really are, what we really want." Silence. She smiled. "Good. You should be afraid." Murmurs of unease spread across the room. "You've ruled this galaxy for millennia, waging wars, building empires, crushing those who stood in your way. And in 5 hours, we proved that your power means nothing, that your greatest conflicts are just problems waiting to be solved." She let that hang in the air before continuing. "We could have destroyed you. We could have rewritten the galaxy in our image, but we didn't." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the room. "Do you know why?" No one spoke. "Because we don't need to." A soft chuckle escaped her lips. "You see, humans aren't conquerors. We're not tyrants. We're problem solvers. We take broken things and fix them. And your galaxy? It's very, very broken." One of the leaders found their voice. "Then what do you want?" The woman tilted her head. "We want you to evolve." The room tensed. "For too long you've been stuck in the same cycle. War, destruction, rebuilding, repeat. You never change? You never move forward? You're stagnant." She spread her arms. "That ends today." Another leader scoffed. "And if we refuse?" The woman's smile faded. "Then we'll fix the problem ourselves." No one doubted her. The galaxy had always believed that power belonged to the strongest, the most advanced, the most ruthless. But humanity had changed the rules. They had rewritten the very foundation of what power meant. And now, for the first time in history, the future of the galaxy belonged to them. Because humanity had done in 5 hours what no empire had done in 1,000 years. They had won. The days following the summit were marked by an eerie silence across the galaxy. Every faction, every empire, every species capable of space travel found itself trapped in the same terrifying realization. Humanity was now in control. Not through war, not through conquest, but because they had simply decided it was so, and no one dared challenge them. The former warring factions had retreated into uneasy compliance, their centuries of hatred suddenly meaningless. Other civilizations, once confident in their own strength, now found themselves questioning everything. What would happen if they became a problem? Humanity had ended an unstoppable war in 5 hours. What else could they do? The answer came faster than anyone expected. A minor skirmish broke out in the outer rim, far from the core worlds where the summit had taken place. It was nothing compared to the centuries-old war that had just ended, just a territorial dispute between 2 lesser factions. But the humans responded, not with diplomacy, not with threats, with absolute authority. A single human warship entered the system where the battle was taking place. It was tiny compared to the capital ships of the warring factions, barely the size of a cruiser. The 2 factions paid it no mind. Then, in the span of 10 minutes, every weapon in the system stopped working. Their engines failed. Their shields collapsed. Their communication systems went silent. No explosions, no visible attacks, no warnings. Everything just shut down. The human warship broadcast a single message across the system. "We are not asking." The battle ended before it had truly begun. The disabled ships were left drifting in space, helpless, until humanity allowed them to leave. The message was clear. War was no longer an option. And if anyone still doubted that, the humans soon made their stance even clearer. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful empires began receiving transmissions from Earth. They were instructions, not requests, not proposals, instructions. Humanity had analyzed the economies of every major civilization, mapped out inefficiencies, and sent detailed directives on how to correct them. Resources would be redistributed. Technologies would be shared. The weak would no longer be exploited. The suffering of lesser species would end. The empires were given precisely one standard cycle to comply. Most obeyed without question. A few hesitated. One refused. The Krivari Dominion, a notoriously cruel empire that had built its strength on slavery and conquest, sent an official response back to Earth. It was a declaration of defiance. They would not bow to humans. They would not follow orders from an upstart species barely a few thousand years into space travel. They had ruled for millennia. They had crushed rebellions, conquered entire star systems, and wiped out species that stood in their way. They were not afraid. But they should have been. Because 3 hours after their message was sent, the Krivari Dominion ceased to exist. No invasion, no drawn-out war, no grand human armada descending from the stars. Their empire simply collapsed. Their warships lost power and fell into the void. Their planetary defenses failed, leaving them exposed. Their leadership vanished without a trace. No one knew how the humans had done it. No one dared ask. The lesson was clear. Humanity was finished giving warnings. From that day forward, the galaxy changed. Not through war, not through treaties, but because humanity had decided how things would be, and the universe obeyed. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. Not the uneasy, temporary ceasefires that had defined past generations, not the fragile treaties, riddled with loopholes and ulterior motives. This was something absolute. Wars did not break out. Star systems did not burn. No species raised a weapon against another. Because everyone understood the new reality. Humanity was watching. And they did not tolerate disorder. The collapse of the Krivari Dominion had been the final warning. No one knew exactly what had happened to them, but the fear it spread was undeniable. Their homeworld, once a thriving capital of conquest, was now a ghost planet. No bodies, no signs of battle. Just empty cities and silent streets. Their entire ruling class had vanished overnight, leaving nothing behind but whispers of a force that could not be stopped, reasoned with, or resisted. The galaxy had never known fear like this before. But as the months passed, a realization settled in. It was working. Crime across the galaxy had plummeted to near zero. The once warring factions, bound by humanity's unbreakable decree, found themselves forced into cooperation. The weak no longer suffered under the heel of the powerful. The corrupt could no longer exploit the helpless. Humanity was not just enforcing peace. They were fixing the galaxy. It became clear that their control went beyond just military power. Their influence seeped into every aspect of civilization. Trade routes were optimized. Food production was increased through superior agricultural technology. Medical advancements eradicated diseases that had plagued entire species for millennia. And no one could stop them. Not because they lacked the strength, but because, for the first time ever, no one wanted to. The galaxy was thriving. Even those who had once feared humanity now depended on them, and that terrified them more than anything, because they all knew a simple, undeniable truth. They had no control anymore. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy with war. They had done it with competence, and now the entire universe belonged to them. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, beyond the reach of human observation, something else was beginning to stir. A question that had been growing in whispered conversations. A question that no one dared ask out loud. If humans could erase empires in hours, if they could impose peace upon the universe without resistance, then what happens when humanity decides they no longer want peace? Because if they could end a war in 5 hours, then what could they do in 5 minutes? The galaxy had never known true order until now. For the first time, planets flourished without fear of invasion. Empires that had once relied on war to expand now found themselves forced into prosperity through cooperation. Even species that had spent centuries as bitter enemies were now bound by humanity's decree. And yet, unease remained. Because while the galaxy thrived under human rule, no one understood them. They weren't conquerors. They weren't tyrants. They were something else entirely. And that terrified everyone. It had been months since the last act of defiance, the Krivari Dominion's disappearance. Since then, no one had challenged humanity. No one dared. But in the darkness of space, beyond the systems humans monitored, a plan was forming. A meeting was held in secret, deep within the ruins of an abandoned moon. Representatives from the galaxy's oldest and most powerful factions gathered in the shadows. They had once been enemies, locked in wars that had lasted for millennia. But today, they had only one enemy. The humans. "We've waited too long," one of them growled, slamming a fist against the table. "Every day they tighten their grip. If we don't act now, we never will." "And what do you propose?" another asked. "Their technology is beyond us. Their strategies defy logic. You saw what happened to the Krivari. They were erased like they never existed." A murmur of unease spread through the room. The Krivari had been powerful. Their fleets had conquered entire sectors with ease. And yet, against the humans, they had lasted only 3 hours before vanishing into nothingness. One of the figures at the table leaned forward. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she said. "We keep trying to fight them. But what if war isn't the answer?" Silence. She continued, her voice measured. "Humans are not warriors, not in the way we understand. They didn't crush us with fleets. They didn't invade. They changed the game itself. So we need to stop thinking like soldiers." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light. "And start thinking like saboteurs." A ripple of understanding spread through the room. They couldn't fight the humans, but they could break them. Slowly, quietly, from within. It began as a whisper in the shadows, a movement that no one acknowledged out loud. But as the weeks passed, it spread. Doubt, suspicion, mistrust. For so long, the galaxy had feared humanity's power. But now a far more dangerous idea took root. What if humans weren't as invincible as they seemed? What if, beneath all their confidence, all their impossible victories, they had a weakness, and once they found it, they would burn the humans to the ground? It started subtly. Humanity had not ruled through fear alone. They had ruled through order. They had fixed what was broken. They had optimized trade, stabilized economies, and eliminated war. And so the first blow wasn't aimed at their fleets or their technology. It was aimed at their systems. Supply routes that had functioned with machine-like precision suddenly faltered. Resources disappeared. Trade agreements that had once been honored without question now fell into dispute. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, a natural fluctuation in a vast, complex galactic network. Then, entire colonies reported famine. Vital shipments simply never arrived. Starving populations, who had come to depend on humanity's perfect logistical control, suddenly found themselves abandoned. And then came the accusations. The whispers started in distant sectors, among those who had always viewed human control with suspicion. The humans are doing this on purpose. They built this system to fail. This was their plan all along, to weaken us, to make us dependent, and now they're letting us starve to remind us who's in charge. The unrest spread like wildfire. Planets that had once embraced human leadership rebelled, not with weapons, but with dissent. Civil unrest erupted across multiple systems. Leaders who had once praised humanity now condemned them, claiming that their rule had brought nothing but a new kind of slavery. And humanity? For the first time since they had taken control, they hesitated. Because this wasn't a war they could end in 5 hours. This was distrust, and no weapon in their arsenal could stop it. The rebellion reached its peak when an entire human diplomatic vessel vanished while en route to a peace summit. No distress signal, no wreckage, just gone. For the first time, humanity was on the defensive. For the first time, they didn't have control. In the heart of Earth's most secure command center, the highest-ranking officials of humanity gathered in silence. They had solved war, they had solved poverty, they had solved crime, but they had never accounted for one thing. What happens when the very people they tried to save turn against them? And as the galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos once more, one terrifying question remained unanswered. How will humanity respond when it finally feels threatened? The air in the human command center was tense. For the first time since humanity had reshaped the galaxy, they were losing control. The rebellion wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It wasn't a war they could end with superior technology or strategy. It was chaos, a creeping infection of doubt and anger spreading across worlds. And worse, it was working. Leaders who had once praised humanity now questioned them. Their own allies hesitated. The systems they had built, once flawless, now collapsed under mistrust. The supply failures, the lost resources, deliberate sabotage. Someone, somewhere, was playing a long game against humanity. But who? A group of analysts sat around a hollow table, examining every disrupted trade route, every missing ship, every sudden uprising. Their technology was advanced beyond any other species, yet the pattern eluded them. "We're dealing with something coordinated," one analyst said. "These failures are too precise, too widespread. Someone is feeding the galaxy a lie, and they're believing it." A voice cut through the room. "They don't need to believe a lie." The room turned to the woman who had once stood before the Galactic Summit, the one who had dictated peace to the universe with nothing but her presence. "They just need to doubt the truth," she continued. Her voice was cold, calculating. The analysts exchanged wary glances. There was something dangerous in the way she said it. For months, humanity had imposed peace through precision, logic, and efficiency. But this was different. This was emotional. And if there was one thing humanity did better than anyone else, it was war. She stepped forward, her hands resting on the holotable, eyes scanning the mess of information before her. "They want to play games?" she murmured. The room was silent. Her gaze lifted, meeting the eyes of every analyst, every strategist, every leader in the room. "Then let's remind them what happens when humanity stops playing nice." The response was swift. It began with a message, not a warning, not a demand, just a simple, undeniable statement, broadcast across every world in every system. "The galaxy is broken again. We are fixing it. Step aside." There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. Humanity had tried peace. Now they were going to end the problem. The first step? Rooting out the infection. Entire fleets, once held back by restraint, now moved without hesitation. Suspected saboteurs vanished overnight. Information networks, once filled with propaganda against humans, were purged. Not with force, but with something far more terrifying. Truth. The missing trade shipments? Traced. The sabotaged infrastructure? Repaired. And then came the exposures. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful factions watched in horror as the true orchestrators of the rebellion were unmasked. The secret cabal that had worked to turn the galaxy against humanity? Their names, locations, and every hidden conspiracy they had woven were broadcast across every system. Planets turned against them. Empires that had been manipulated into rebellion suddenly realized they had been played. And the ones responsible? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But humanity wasn't done. Because this time they weren't just fixing the galaxy. They were redesigning it. And when humans decide to reshape something, they don't stop until it's perfect. The galaxy watched in silence as humanity erased its enemies. Not with weapons, not with war, but with cold, calculated inevitability. One by one, the architects of the rebellion fell. Their hidden operations exposed, their influence shattered, their allies abandoning them in fear. The factions that had conspired against humanity found themselves hunted, not by fleets or armies, but by something far worse. Truth. Humanity had mastered war, they had mastered strategy, but above all, they had mastered control. And now, they were correcting the galaxy. The final holdout of the rebellion, a hidden council of the most powerful conspirators, gathered on a remote world, desperate to salvage what little remained of their plan. "They're destroying everything," one of them spat. "We spent years planting distrust, years undermining them. How did they unravel it so fast? They didn't unravel it, another whispered, eyes wide with terror. They saw it coming. The room fell into a stunned silence. No one wanted to admit it, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity had played along. They had allowed the rebellion to spread, allowed the conspiracies to fester, until they had everything they needed. Then, they crushed it in a matter of days. One of the leaders slammed a fist onto the table. "We have to disappear. We have to cut all ties, scatter across the galaxy." The lights flickered. Every screen in the room hijacked at once. And then a face appeared. Not a soldier, not a machine. The human woman who had dictated peace, who had ended a war in 5 hours, who had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. She smiled. "Running won't help you," she said simply. The room erupted into chaos. Some reached for weapons, others scrambled for escape routes. But it was already too late. The doors slammed shut. Their ships went offline. Their weapons failed. And then, the woman on the screen spoke one last time. "We let you play your little game," she said, her voice calm. "Now it's over." The transmission cut out. And then, nothing. The rebellion's leader simply vanished. No screams, no destruction, no war, just silence. And when the galaxy woke up the next day, there was no sign the conspirators had ever existed. There were no explanations, no bodies, just a single message, broadcast across every world, every system, every empire. "The galaxy is stable now. Do not break it again." Humanity had won, and this time, there would be no second chances. The galaxy belonged to them forever.